Between sessions for the Joint Finance Committee in Madison. Tomorrow, the JFC will address school funding and tax cuts on their agenda, some big ticket items in the ongoing big budget battle. As we've discussed, the governor and Republican leadership broke off face-to-face talks last week. That leaves the Joint Finance Committee to craft a budget that will be subjected to the governor's powerful veto pen. That pen gives him the ability to issue partial vetoes or the entire budget. The current budget expires at the end of the month, as you know, a deadline the governor sure didn't seem too concerned about during his visit here yesterday.
I feel strongly that we will end up with a good product, but it's right now at this point in time, we're going to let the Joint Finance Committee do their thing and see what it looks like. The last thing I would want to do as governor is to veto a budget. That's just not something that's in my DNA.
All right, so where does that leave us? Time now to turn to the expert. And of course, we welcome in J.R. Ross, the editor of WisPolitics.com. So let's start with this doomsday scenario, for lack of a better phrase here, J.R. What happens if the governor, he does find it in his DNA to veto an entire budget?
Well, things just go along as is. I don't want to diminish or blow off that possibility. It hasn't happened in my career in Wisconsin, but we're not like the federal government. If there's no new budget when the fiscal year starts July 1st, things go on under current spending levels. That's not a big deal. And they actually have a couple of things already guaranteed, like local governments. There's a new deal on state aid where they get automatic increases through sales tax collections. Schools, the governor had a veto in the 23-25 budget for 400 years, such an annual increase in the spending cap per student. So there aren't pressure points in that regard. But there's like this pride thing about being done, quote, on time. There's also things like our Medicaid rolls and having to handle those. So there are reasons to be done. And oh, by the way, if you want a tax cut, you got to pass a budget.
What did you make of the comments from Speaker Vos Sunday on Up Front when he was asked by Matt Smith about the statements that went out when the talks broke down? And he said, basically, that's a lie, referring to Governor Evers saying that they weren't willing to do anything on the issues that were important to the governor, K-12 spending, UW system, for example. What did you make of those comments?
Well, it's interesting because people took note after talks first broke down and there was an announcement that we're not doing this anymore. There's lots of like, hey, thanks for the effort. We appreciate, you try to work with this kind of thing. So they got past those kind of canned comments and got into more how they really feel. Thought was interesting is we got some details from the governors up in Green Bay this week about what one of those disagreements was. So special education funding in Wisconsin, we reimburse the state, we reimburse districts for how much they spend. The governor's budget wanted to go to 60%. He said Republicans wanted 30%. So there's an area where they weren't quite there. Eye of the beholder for Robin Vos, and that's meaningful versus Tony was saying it's not.
All right, you mentioned Governor Evers in Green Bay yesterday. The comment specifically, he misspoke. He said 60 million and 30 million when it was actually percentages, but it allowed the Joint Finance Committee folks to say, we've never heard of those numbers before, because he used millions instead of percentages. That Joint Finance Committee, JR, is going to meet again tomorrow, and on the agenda is the K-12 funding. Is that going to give us an idea of how close the two sides are, and maybe if it's indicative of there's a chance for the two sides to come together on some of these big issues like K-12 spending?
Oh, that and taxes. I mean, those are two things that I'm watching because, at least in the near term, education funding, where are they at? Remember, we've got a lot of cash to spend in Wisconsin right now, but it's one-time cash. And what I mean by that is the surplus is $4.3 billion roughly, or will be as of June 30th. That money is not going to get carried forward. If you spend it, if you take that money for ongoing expenses, you got to cover those ongoing expenses in the future without that money laying around a pot of cash, right? Our ongoing revenues are gross about $1.5 billion. So my question is, where do they find the money for education? How much do they find? Because the more you put in, the more you're committing in future years. That's going to be a challenge for them on taxes. Republicans in the Assembly have talked about tax break retirement income since December. Republicans in the Senate are talking about expanding the income covered by the second lowest of the four income tax brackets. Where's their agreement? The governor said he agreed to what they wanted, but they wanted what he wanted. So what did they want? And then the second part of that is it good enough to get to 17 Republican votes in the Senate and 50 in the Assembly? I know some members of the Senate Republican caucus, for example, have concerns about, it's called the structural deficit. I was talking about where you make future commitments and you've got to cover that spending in the future. the more you spend, and that includes tax cuts. If you cut taxes, it's an ongoing expense, it's essential in the books. The more you put toward tax cuts, the more you're committing us to the future years to cover that.
I want to ask you specifically about circuit court funding. It's been a big issue up here. Representative Franklin, a Republican, put forth a budget proposal to fund Brown County circuit courts. It's an issue we've talked about a lot of times on this program with the county executive. The shortfalls are really costing taxpayers up here about $6 million a year, according to him. This proposal would have added 2 circuit court judges, 3 assistant district attorneys, a couple of public defenders. That was shot down yesterday by the Joint Finance Committee. They did approve a $10 million annual increase for the circuit court system, but that's statewide, and it is far short of what the Wisconsin Counties Association wanted for this problem, which was $70 million, JR. The governor had put in $77 million. So there's a big gap there. What tools are still at the disposal of the folks involved here to close that gap? Is it just the powerful pen?
You know, if you can lobby your colleagues in the caucuses, Republican caucuses, to go farther, that's one option. But look, I don't want to be flippant, but if you could find me any county executive in Wisconsin who doesn't want more money for the courts or for other things, I'd be shocked. I mean, everybody wants more. Everybody has needs. But again, you know, they passed $10 million out of committee. How do you change that in the caucuses where it goes to the floor for a full vote of the full legislature in the budget for the governor?
Last question for you. Any indication from folks you've been talking to there in Madison? We still got about 3 weeks left here. The governor yesterday in Green Bay said, sure, I'd go back to the table if there were reason to go back to the table. Are you hearing any rumblings that at least on some of these big items that they could get back together before the end of the month?
The door's not closed, but the push right now is to get enough Republican votes to pass a budget. What I'm watching is, okay, the Finance Committee, the people on that committee are kind of put there to be part of the team, right? The budget they produce, these team members, is going to be good enough for the other members of the caucus. Then it becomes a question of what if it's good enough for one caucus but not the other? So I've heard scenarios from people in the Capitol of, oh, they could pass House X, then go to House Y and get changed. Then what? If they get stuck, if they can't pass a budget with only Republican votes, then you need the governor to get involved to get Democrats on board. Because for most Democrats, I'm going to bet you money that this budget they produce will not have enough for education for them, will not have enough for child care for them, and other priorities the governor laid out. They're going to say, this is not enough for my vote.
All right, we'll see if this picture becomes a little bit clearer after tomorrow's meeting of the Joint Finance Committee. JR, thanks as always for the time and the insight.